to do is to use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency power of the federal government, to accelerate the major projects that we need in order to build this economy and take on the Americans.
You can't handle the truth. Resolve to resist.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me today. It's David Krayden here for Stand on Guard. What a morning. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for standing by. I had some, well, not technical difficulty, timing difficulties with the interview start time and getting the video processed. Just took a lot longer than I anticipated, but thank you for sticking around. When we come back, we'll get to that Sam Cooper interview. Incredible stuff. We'll be right back.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist.
Yes, please like this broadcast. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Resubscribe if you've been unsubscribed. Happens all the time. To the nicest people, too. I really appreciate your support of this station. Helps us beat the YouTube censorship. And every day it's something else. So if you can all pile on, do your best. So a great interview coming up with Sam Cooper. Before we get there, Mark Carney just can't stay out of the news. I was going to show you a clip from his, I think it was Sunday interview with Rosemary Barton, but it is nauseating to watch. But guess what? New research has unearthed that Mark Carney's firm, Brookfield Asset Management, owned an Australian coal shipping port. The Dalrymple Bay Terminal, if I'm mispronouncing. Dalrymple Bay Terminal, yes, which supplied China with 5.8 million tons of dirty coal per year. This is Mr. Net Zero, right? Or is this another Mark Carney? Or another Brookfield Asset Management? Sounds like such a corporate name, man. So here's this guy telling us all not to use. He even calls, it's not just coal, and it's not just fossil fuels. Carbon is a pollutant. He calls people who produce carbon polluters. I really, really resent that. I really, really resent that. But so Mark Carney fought to destroy Canada's energy industry in the name of fighting climate change. In reality, he did it so his company, which owns an Australian coal terminal, could keep out Canadian competition and export 10 million tons of coal to Asia every single year. This guy is just the walking example of hypocrisy. I thought we already had one in Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is the guy who calls you a racist, even though he's the guy who did blackface. Justin Trudeau is the guy who calls you misogynistic, even though he's the one that's terrorized his female MPs and booted his female cabinet ministers from cabinet. That's hypocrisy. But so Mark Carney. Mark Carney is hypocrite with a capital H. This is the guy who thinks, hey, no big deal. I tell Canadians not to use those fossil fuels because they're dirty. But my company will use them and will sell them. This is a wealthy man. Mark Carney is a millionaire. He has made lots of money from industries, facilities, products that he publicly condemns and tells you not to use. That is gross hypocrisy. There's more. Mark Carney, China foreign interference pressure points. Brookfield Asset Management investment in Bell and Road. Carney's company selling coal from Australia to China. Snow Goose Media, communist China sponsored endorsement of Carney. Snow Goose Media has endorsed Carney, and when we talk to Sam Cooper, he will tell you why he thinks Mark Carney is a target for Chinese interference. Now, Christy Freeland was also targeted by the CCP. Carney meeting with Xi Jinping in March 2024 and other Chinese business leaders. This guy is knee-deep in Chinese interference. We have to know that. So what do we say? We say, just say no to Mark Carney. You can buy this sticker from the store. We've got some of the best merchandise. I'll show you the merchandise ad later. We got some of the best merchandise on the internet, in the market, on the market. And what do we need in Canada? So I want to hear a rallying cry from all Canadians. Doge! Department of Government Efficiency. We need Doge. Why isn't Pierre Poilievre saying that every day? I'm serious. Why do we not hear Pierre Poilievre begin the day with, I promise to implement, to initiate, to start a Department of Government Efficiency as soon as I become Prime Minister. And we will root out all of the, not just the inefficiencies, but the corruption, the wastage, and the insanity in our federal government. I want to hear Pierre Poilievre talk about that. Now, I'll get to this. I might come back to this at the end of the show. Fascinating. I'm going to have Brad Hunter on the show on Thursday to discuss this column. Because, and I'll just read a bit to you. He says he's dying to come on to talk about this column. I'll just read a little bit from the column, but he's going to come on and tell you he talked to a bunch of whistleblowers at the Canadian Border Security Agency, CBSA. It says criminals, grifters, aspiring terrorists, extremists, and other less than savory characters have washed onto Canadian shores in a tsunami of stupidity over the past decade. And then we can't get rid of them. Earlier this week, I lambasted the Canadian Border Security Agency, CBSA, for the situation has become nothing short of a full-blown crisis. But CBSA frontline workers were quick to respond. Don't blame us, a number of them wrote me. Blame Justin Trudeau's open door Liberal government and an immigration and refugee board packed with radical left ideologues. Officers say they have essentially been handcuffed for making decisions that keep Canadians safe. Now, Brad will be on the show Thursday to discuss this further. I want to get to our interview with Sam Cooper. And here's Sam now. Investigative journalist. We have had Sam on the show in the past, I think last October. He's been talking about the Hogue inquiry. He's been talking about the drug kingpins in Canada. He's been talking about Chinese interference. And don't miss his book, Willful Blindness. We've got the first and second edition covers here for you. Don't miss this book. It is well worth reading. And don't miss The Bureau, which is Sam's Substack. Be a paid subscriber. For that matter, be one of my paid subscribers too. But we need the money to do the work, and Sam is doing the work. And please be a paid subscriber to the Bureau. And I put this slide up, Sam, because I want to start here. You said the Hogue inquiry, when Justice Hogue came out with the report, I was not satisfied. I thought there was some problems here. You said it was a whitewash. Why would you characterize it that way?
Well, there was a whole pattern of activities within the Trudeau government that didn't add up to a government paying attention to urgent national security risks. And so that ranges from the fact that Justice Hogue herself acknowledged in her report that dealing with the questions around why a warrant targeting a Liberal Party power broker and fundraiser for the party months ahead of the 2021 election that sat in allegedly Bill Blair's office for at least 54 days. We know that he was aware of the warrant and the issues surrounding it for a lot longer than 54 days, and yet it wasn't signed. And so witness after witness from the Trudeau government, including Bill Blair, his former chief of staff, could not give a good answer as to why that warrant didn't move forward. I reported for the Bureau on revelations in Hogue's final report. For the first time, we learned that a CSIS officer had repeatedly emailed internally that they were concerned that the Trudeau government could be interfering with that warrant approval, and this could have severe consequences to the investigation that was called for. So that's one example where Justice Hogue said she could not get any good reason for this unprecedented delay, and she acknowledged it could be an extremely serious issue if the Trudeau government did interfere. And yet she said, since Bill Blair, his former chief of staff, Justin Trudeau's prime minister's office aides, including Katie Telford and others, said that there was no interference and yet could not give a good explanation, Justice Hogue said she could not find anything adverse. Simply people didn't communicate well and dropped the ball, and they dropped the ball. So I say that just doesn't add up. It's not good enough. There were many different similar issues, including Bill Blair claims that he failed to open an email, and that's why Bill Blair couldn't, in his minister's position, warn MP Michael Chan that his family was the target of Chinese intelligence collection. And, many other Trudeau ministers apparently had sort of the same kind of the dog ate my homework type excuses. And yet Justice Hogue couldn't come to the conclusion that a number of lawyers told her, essentially, there's only one answer here. The Trudeau government was not responding to warnings that China had infiltrated the elections recently and was essentially, taking strong actions against our democracy. And yet the Trudeau government, for partisan reasons, didn't respond. David, I'll end my answer here. Enough documents came out where even the director of CSIS, the former director, and his staff had warned the Trudeau government Canada faces an existential threat if it did not respond to this off-the-scale interference that goes beyond what our Five Eyes partners are experiencing, and it's because Canada wasn't responding. So, it stunned me that Justice Hogue couldn't come to similar conclusions as documents from CSIS, documents from the NSI COP panel. And that's why I say I talked to former CSIS officers. They said, this is a whitewash at best. And those are the examples.
I found it interesting, too, that David McGuinty, who is now public safety minister and who was the chair of NISCOP, the committee that released this report, that said there was evidence of espionage. Let's call it that. And as public safety minister, he says, well, there's no problem with what the Hogue said and what my report said. No disconnect at all. And I said, yeah, if unless you're reading a different report, then there's no disconnect. But clearly, these are completely different conclusions. And now that you're a minister, now that you're part of the Trudeau cabinet, your story has changed. And I'm sure you found it interesting. I don't think I've ever asked you this, though. Do you think there is a connection between the Winnipeg microbiology lab dismissal of two Chinese scientists who were spying for the Chinese police or the Chinese army, actually, while they were in Winnipeg working at a Canadian microbiology lab, the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg? Do you think there is a connection between their quiet dismissal? They were just basically told to go home. There was no publicity about it. Nothing was said to the media at the time. It took over a year for that information to get out. And that very year, we have a fall election, 2019 election. where we now know that there was massive Chinese interference, at least in the GTA. You think there was a connection between that? Was there possibly a quid pro quo that we'll let you guys go back quietly? There will be no repercussions, but we kind of expect your help in the next election?
Well, I mean, I can't make that assessment at all in connecting it to the election, but I can say that it's extremely strange that those two scientists were somehow, this was supposed to be a very active RCMP investigation, and yet essentially they're allowed to travel back to China with no consequences. And I have read the documents where the main, suspect there, Dr. Chu, says that, she was very surprised that CSIS officers were questioning her and talking about matters such as NATO and, serious infiltration of Canada's lab. And she seemed to, kind of be playing ignorant. But the evidence came out that very much the People's Liberation Army was running essentially amok under her guidance. In fact, she had, basically forged documents to welcome high-level PLA operatives into the Winnipeg lab. And so, as I've reported, the Justin Trudeau government, when the Conservatives and others, myself as a reporter, were pointing to documents that were forced out of the Trudeau government, connecting these PLA scientists to Chinese bioweapon offense or defense research, whatever it was, it's proven that the highest level Chinese bioweapons researchers tasked from dangerous entities at a high level in the PLA were conversant with and directing apparently Dr. Chu and her colleagues in that lab. So there's no question that there were the concerns that Canada was adding to the Wuhan lab's capacity. And now, as you know, David, now finally the CIA, along with the FBI and agencies around the world, are starting to line up and say they believe that this, the COVID pandemic was a lab leak accident in Wuhan. So what I'm saying here is there's no question that Dr. Chu in Winnipeg had a serious role in adding to the Wuhan lab's capacity. And, what were her and her husband, or that she claims to be the husband, we don't know if they're just a spy team, were they let go because they, if they faced, God forbid, a court procedure in Canada, information damaging to Justin Trudeau's government could come out? I think that's a slam dunk. Of course, bad information would come out. And I'm quite certain that our American, security colleagues would have liked to know more information because, David, I know from a former Trump admin official that led the Wuhan lab investigation, David Asher, told me they had concerns that Canada's capacity was being used by the PLA. And, in a familiar theme, we didn't really seem to be doing anything about it. So the question is why?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can make the conclusion that there was a quid pro quo, but it certainly looks suspicious to me, and it always has. And I think there's a story there yet to be uncovered. Maybe it's something you'll get to because you're doing a bang-up job as it is. I want to turn quickly to Mark Carney. We know his Brookfield Asset Management company not only does a lot of business with fossil fuels, which of course is completely hypocritical for a guy who wants net zero, but it also has very strong interests in China. And I was just looking at these this morning. Do you think Carney is an obvious target for Chinese interference?
I do think Mr. Carney, as a globally influential banker, is a target for China. And in fact, his philosophy of trade, I don't know if he has a philosophy of national security, but I've seen the data points that as the Bank of England governor, he increased that country's dealings with the Bank of China. And so I think the argument was that that would lead to greater sort of multilateral cooperation between England and China. And as you know, the whole of Europe right now is sort of struggling with whether they increase trade with China as the United States, global behemoth, backs off in security and trade. But I can say that that type of multilateralism that Mr. Carney promoted in England he would promote in Canada, and that just leads to more Belt and Road trade deals. And David, as you know, the U.S. State Department is winding back the Belt and Road in Panama. And as I've reported, I think the U.S. State Department has a serious and legitimate concern that British Columbia has a Belt and Road facility. And these are used for Chinese corruption, organized crime infest those trade sort of deals. And so I guess I would end my answer by saying, very much like Mike Bloomberg, the former New York mayor and major international business person who came out publicly endorsing Mark Carney's leadership, both of those men would have direct business dealings in China and would be the type of international trade, philosophy leaders that China certainly wants to sow influence through and win influence with, because China will like to have leaders in positions that increase simply trade between those host nations and China. And as you know, my assessment is that the deeper you're trading with China, the closer they are to capturing and hollowing out aspects of your society.
Yes, you've done a lot of research on the Vancouver ports. I don't want to get in too extensively with that because we've talked about that recently on this show. You've uncovered the fact that that drug with the letter F, I don't know how many times I can say it on YouTube before getting targeted for saying it, but we know what we're talking about. It's coming through the Vancouver ports from China. China is getting away with this. It's not being detected. The precursors for this drug are getting into meth and F labs so it can be produced in Canada and it's being exported to the States. You have substantiated that. But what really shocked people in a recent interview you did was you said the Liberal Party is a beneficiary of this drug money from these drug kingpins, that they are receiving cash donations or whatever they're getting, but they're receiving financial benefit from drug kingpins. Is this true?
Well, it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. The senior figures in Asian organized crime that my information, strong information, says are subject of Chinese police station investigations, are also subject of election interference sort of activities, supporting of various Canadian politicians. These sophisticated, hundreds of to billions net worth senior Asian organized crime figures in Canada have direct connectivity to the Chinese state, and they are part of the web of finance, including underground casinos, including money laundering through British Columbia casinos, Ontario casinos, legal and illegal, that the police say is part of funding China's drug trafficking activities. So absolutely, with full confidence from my sourcing in Canadian police, US enforcement experts, even Mayor Brad West out in Vancouver has now come on the Bureau and said that Secretary of State Antony Blinken and US officials have concerns that Canada, has weaknesses with regards to how our laws are being used by Chinese organized crime to deal and produce fentanyl from Canada. And US officials, I'm told, and I hear directly from Canadian and US officials say they have a concern that these Asian organized crime figures involved in that money laundering, trafficking networks are close to Canada's political class. And I can point in pictures to suspects of Canadian police that I know are donors and supporters of the Liberal Trudeau government.
Yes, and you talk about money laundering, and you talk about money laundering in Toronto specifically. If I can find that story there, here. No, it's not the one. Where are we here? Yes. Okay. There we go. This housing bubble in Toronto, and it's also, of course, in Vancouver. But you might be interested in this. After I recently talked about your bureau report on money laundering, I got an email from a landscaper in Calgary who watches the show, and he said he's working at communities that are $3 million custom made homes. Every home is $3 million minimum. And he says they're all custom homes, and our landscape company is responsible for mowing all their lawns and trimming and such. However, working there all year long, I get to see the school buses come and I get to see the community mingle. So, however, with over 600 homes in this very wealthy community, I see a fraction of the people who live there. He's saying this is very unusual because with 600 homes being built every year throughout the summer and into the winter, nobody lives there. He says occasionally he'll see a school bus drop some Asian Canadian kids off. But in a community of 600 homes, he says maybe 5 to a dozen are occupied. Now, is that not evidence that there's incredible money laundering going on in the real estate world in Vancouver, Toronto, and now we hear a report like this out of Calgary that these $3 million homes are just simply being built and somebody's paying for them, somebody's buying them. And I don't know very many people who can buy a $3 million home and not bother to move in. But does this sound to you like further evidence that this drug money is being laundered into the real estate market?
What I can say is this sounds like one of the anecdotes that I heard for years as a reporter in Vancouver, and that triggered my deeper research there, and that I continued in Toronto. And just starting with what I know best in Vancouver and in Toronto, my estimations, and this includes talking with high level sort of policing experts, analyzing data, talking to a data scientist in one case from Simon Fraser University, talking to people that know the regulation of mortgages and know the FinTrack's view on what's happening in Canada. It's hundreds of billions in each of those cities at a low end. In Vancouver, hundreds of billions have been laundered, through real estate fraud networks. So this includes, mortgage lending in that city, since around 2010, 2012 up till now, hundreds of billions in Toronto, right? And again, the same data metrics I'm looking at. And, just to talk about that story, FinTrack wasn't, profiling or picking on just the diaspora from Asia because they're mean or racially motivated. FinTrack and the RCMP know that, at scale, some international migrant communities have been used for international organized crime. And it relates to how those countries, including China and Iran, have export controls or sanctions against them. And so these communities are used by incredibly sophisticated transnational fraud and organized crime networks to launder just incredible amounts. And so let's talk about Calgary and Edmonton. Certainly, I know that what's known as the company, or Sam Gore. So this is a network of the highest level transnational Asian triads with leaders in Vancouver and Toronto. They have leaders in Alberta as well. Manitoba, Saskatchewan. It's run out of Toronto. I have indications that in Atlantic Canada, the same triad networks are very active. So my point here is that if I'm saying, based on very sound, estimates from experts, that hundreds of billions are being laundered in Vancouver and Toronto, I would say big amounts of money are being laundered in Alberta in the same ways. And I have been able to talk directly to police investigators that are looking into those issues in Alberta.
What fascinates me about this whole money laundering phenomena is that Pierre Poilievre loves to talk about the housing crisis as being foundational to the failing Canadian economy. And as he's talking less about the carbon tax right now because Mark Carney's pretending he doesn't like it either, Pierre Poilievre has been talking a lot about housing and why it costs so much to buy a house in Canada. He blames a lot of that on taxation and regulation, and he's right. That's one of the reasons homes are so expensive in Canada, why we have the lowest per capita housing rate in the world. It's small in amongst industrialized countries. It's even lower than Japan. But I think he's missing something here. I think he's missing the money laundering element, which I think you have revealed. And this is all so interconnected, isn't it? The failing economy, the border security, the potential tariffs, the money laundering. I think you're one of the few people who's actually tied all of this together. Thanks for joining me with this. And of course, you can watch the entire interview with Sam Cooper on Rumble, and you can find the precise information as to how to find that in the description below. But I'll be back in a few minutes, well, actually less than a minute, with some concluding remarks. Have a look at our store. I keep saying what wonderful merchandise we have. And you know what? I mean it. It's great. And people are really starting to notice it. So tomorrow, I'll be back the usual time, 10 o'clock. Once again, a little mix up this morning. Took us longer than I thought to get the show together, but we'll be back at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And we're going to be talking about, is the deep state dead or dying in the United States? Is Donald Trump actually delivering on his promise to bring peace to Ukraine, the Middle East, and the world, and to destroy the deep state? Is that happening? We're going to be looking at the evidence that it might be. So thanks for watching today, folks. We just really appreciate your support so much. We'll see you again tomorrow. Remember to resolve to resist, and remember that your opinion matters and your free speech matters. And that's what we're fighting for here.